We're in John chapter 1, starting with verse 19. And John is about to get into it with the Levites and the priests that are sent from what John calls the Jews. So let's look at verse 19. Now, this was John's testimony when the Jews of Jerusalem sent priests and Levites to ask him who he was. So again, we lead with the testimony, right? The witness, the martyrion, the martyr. John is giving testimony to Jesus. And the word Jews, John uses the word Jews quite a bit throughout this gospel. And usually what he's doing is referring to the leadership, which is the Sanhedrin, the 70 leaders of the Jewish people, when he uses that term. Today, John gets kind of a bad rap for using that term Jews, almost like it's anti-Semitic, but that's not really John's intention. His intention is to identify who's the leadership of the Jewish people. Usually when he uses that word Jews, he's referring to that. But they send priests and Levites, kind of the foot soldiers of the religious leadership, or the priests and the Levites. And they want to know who John is, because John is doing something new. He's baptizing for repentance in the middle of the desert. He's out by the Dead Sea and the Jordan River. And he's doing a new thing, and they want to know why. They want some kind of prophetic authority, and they want to see a sign, usually, to say that you have the authority to do this. So that's what they're looking for. So they send them out there. So verse 20, he did not fail to confess, but confessed freely, I am not the Christ. So right off the bat, right, the idea that the Christ is coming is a theme of John's community. The Christ would be the Messiah, like David, who would come and free his people, right? Or as David is called Messiah, he conquers his enemies. Later on, when Cyrus, who is not even Jewish, right? He's the emperor of Persia. When Cyrus is called Messiah or Christ, he is the one who conquers their enemies and allows the people to go back to Jerusalem so that they can rebuild the temple. So it's both a nationalistic thing, a political thing, and a spiritual thing with the temple. So Messiah is a very loaded term. John was in the Qumran community near the Dead Sea, and one of the things they're known for is waiting for the Messiah, right? They thought it was imminent, and of course, here in the gospel, it is imminent. But he just says, I am not that one. Right? That's his job, to give witness, to testify, but not to lift up himself. So verse 21, they ask him, then who are you? Are you Elijah? He said, I am not. Are you the prophet? He answered, no. So again, this is John's answering in the negative, right? He does that a lot. We saw that in the first verses, right? Not anything that was not made through Jesus. How does that read? Without him, nothing was made that has been made, right? So that negative way of saying things. Here, again, John is doing that, right? Confessing, I am not the Christ, and giving the negative answer for all of these possibilities here. Who is Elijah? Elijah is considered the greatest prophet of Israel. Elijah defeated the prophets of Baal, all of the false prophets of his day, and he called down fire from heaven on Mount Carmel, considered one of the greatest prophetic works of the Bible. The reason that he's seen as the greatest. So they're thinking about Elijah, and he's like, nope, I'm not him. And then they say, are you the prophet? And this is a little more obscure of a reference, but in John's community, they would have known who the prophet was. They were waiting for him too. And if you go back and read Deuteronomy 18, starting with verse 15, Moses tells the people that God will send a prophet who is just like Moses. He will do the things that Moses does. And so this is the reference. We don't see this reference very much, I don't think, anywhere else in the New Testament. And not mentioned in the Old Testament either. Like I said, it's more of an obscure reference, but to the people of John's day in his community, it would have been an important reference. Are you this prophet like Moses? And he says no. So interesting. Good to read through that Deuteronomy 18 just to get a feel for that. Verse 22, finally they said, well, who are you? Give us an answer to take back to those who sent us. What do you say about yourself? So, John is the witness, right? When they're asking him, what are you saying? And John replied, verse 23, in the words of Isaiah the prophet, I am the voice of one calling in the desert, make straight the way for the Lord. So John quotes Isaiah 40, verse 3, and he shares this with all the other Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. They all quote this. Some quote it a little farther. John's is more brief, but, and they change it a little bit. The exact quote is, in the wilderness cry out, right? That's what Isaiah says. And, John rephrases to say, I am the voice of one calling out in the desert, make straight the way for the Lord. So, he references Isaiah there. Verse 24, now some of the Pharisees who had been sent questioned him, why do you baptize if you are not Christ or Elijah or the prophet? So the Pharisees have a little more weight behind them than just the scribes or priests, I think. They, they're going to kind of interrogate him a little bit. And they want to know, what authority John is doing this baptizing by. If it's a new religious practice, they want to know, who are you to institute this? And so they rename Christ, Elijah, and the prophet, right? So those are named twice here. John does a lot of that repeating, just for emphasis. Verse 26, John says, I baptize with water, but among you stands one who you do not know. So he uses the word know, and this is an echo of, when the word comes into the world, but the world does not recognize him, right? The world does not know who he is. And here John is saying, this one is standing among you, but you do not know him. So it's connected to that reference, that earlier reference of he came into the world. He came to his own, but his own did not know him, right? This is maybe a direct example of his own not knowing him. You do not know him. And then 27, he says, he is the one who comes after me, the thong of whose sandals I am not worthy to untie. So here John is saying that even though I'm first and I have the ministry and the disciples and the people, and he said, I am below his shoes, right? I am so much less than him that I'm underneath his feet. I cannot untie his sandals. And that's a reference to what the work of a slave would do, right? Would be to take out the sandals and wash the feet like Jesus does later in John 13. John is saying, I'm not even worthy to be that person. I'm not even worthy to be the slave who takes off the sandals and washes the feet of this one. That's how great he is. So John emphasizes all that. And then verse 28, all this happened at Bethany on the other side of the Jordan where John was baptizing. So this is a different Bethany than the one that's mentioned later. There's a Bethany that's near Jerusalem, and there's a Bethany that's way out in the middle of nowhere by the Jordan River and the Dead Sea area. So this is the place where they're at. So we'll stop there, verse 28, and we'll pick it up with verse 29 next time. Thanks.